This is Level 2 of the CFA program, Ethical and Professional Standards, and the reading on Code of Ethics and Standards of Professional Conduct. You might be tempted to think that these readings are virtually identical to what you saw back in Level 1, and in fact that may or may not be true, but you need to be aware of some of the subtle and testing differences between Level 1 and Level 2. I mean, every topic is going to be tested, but you need to be aware that this will probably be on a much more granular level. You will be required to answer item set questions, which will be based on a vignette. So remember, back in Level 1, you had these standalone questions. Now you're going to be faced with a handful of paragraphs and then have to answer 4 or 6 questions that relate back into those paragraphs inside of the vignette. And so the questions are probably going to be a little bit more subtle. They'll be a little bit more application oriented. In fact, if you take a look at the topic level learning outcome in this first reading, you'll see 3 things there. What the CFA Institute wants you to be able to do is to demonstrate knowledge of the code and the standards. And so that's what we're going to do in this first reading. We're really just going to introduce things. When we get to the second reading, we'll get to that granular level in much more detail. You'll also be required to identify violations and then recommend appropriate measures to resolve those violations. And that may or may not sound a little bit like what you did back in Level 1, but I'm guessing that this will be much more challenging than it was during that Level 1 exam. Let me give you a piece of personal advice. Now, when I went through the program, I didn't have my phone or my laptop. I had the actual ethics handbook, and I used to carry that thing around with me, and I would read it in between classes. I would read it while I was eating lunch. I would read it, and once I finished it, then I would go back to the beginning and I would read it again. So my suggestion is to get that out, however you do it, electronically, and just continue to expose yourself to these ethical questions, right? The knowledge base, first of all, and then be able to identify. So that's one level of learning, and then be able to make some kind of recommendations. Now, having said all that, let's go ahead and look at these 2 learning objectives inside of the first reading. So describe the 6 components of the code and the 7 standards. So we'll go through those, relatively briefly today, but then in the next recording, we'll go ahead and get into great detail. And then the second one is to explain ethical responsibilities. All right, let's go ahead and start with the Code of Ethics. All right, what does that tell us in that slide? A broad ethical guideline for members and candidates. Remember, I'm certain that you remember this. It's not just for members, but it's for candidates as well. Members and candidates are expected to adhere to the codes and promote these values. All right, let's talk a little bit more specifically about these 6 components. So look at these 2 slides. I've got 3 on that slide and 3 on that slide. So let's go through these. Now, I'm guessing that you know the definition of integrity and competence and diligence and respect. Let me go ahead and just kind of give you some sense of my take on what these words mean and what they mean in terms of examination possibilities. I try to teach my children about integrity, and I always say to them, look, you're going to be faced with decisions during the course of your lives, and your mom and I would be super proud of you if you made these decisions as if the 2 of us were staring over your shoulder. That's integrity, right? Making the decision when you're sitting all by yourself, nobody's around, but pretending that someone is there looking over your shoulder, making certain that you make an ethical decision. Now, of course, on an exam, it's not going to be your mom and dad or your grandparents or your aunts or uncles, whoever raised you. It's going to be people like your colleagues, people like your competitors, your employers, your firms, government agencies and government bodies, maybe even Congress. And so I'm guessing that these questions that regard integrity will be about, hey, let's go ahead and make sure that we know what the ethics are, what we can do about them, and how we can apply so that we make wise decisions. Competence, of course, this is what we're trying to do here over these next recordings. Increase your knowledge base and your ability to apply that knowledge base to some kind of a scenario. Competence, right? Diligence, that just means hard work. My father used to say to me when I was a young dude, he would say, hey, get the shovel and help me dig the garden. Let's work hard together and something will come of this. Of course, the lettuce and the tomatoes and all that came from it. But, there's a bonding, there's diligence, there's value in hard work. Respect, of course, you learn respect back in kindergarten. You learn to make sure that you are in line, that you don't cut in front of somebody else, that you allow somebody else to get a drink of water, respect. So let's go ahead and make sure that we respect and honor others. And we're going to do all this in an ethical manner. And so, look, I listed some of those just briefly, right? Public clients, prospective clients, employers. So we have all of these other groups of people and individuals inside and outside of the investment profession. All right, how about the second one? Place the integrity of the investment profession. All right, let me go ahead and use this 2021 example of GameStop. I'm guessing that you're aware of all of this stuff. And, we have lots and lots of groups of people involved in GameStop. We have hedge funds, we have trading platforms, we have individual investors, maybe we have other institutional investors, maybe we have large exchanges, maybe we have financial advisors. Clearly we have risk managers. So we have lots of people inside of the investment profession. And it's my hope that when we figure out exactly what happened, and perhaps we'll never figure out exactly what happened, that the investment professionals can look around and say, yes, we acted with integrity. But let's also not forget, interest of clients must be placed above own personal interests. Reasonable care, that makes perfect sense. I think that's a commonsensical, kind of a sense. Reasonable care means that anybody who evaluates your performance would say, oh, Jim, yeah, I saw what you did. You made a recommendation to invest in this particular credit default swap, and you investigated the issuer, and you looked at yield to maturity and duration and convexity, and you did all that stuff. Yeah, that was reasonable. Independent professional judgment. Those of you who follow politics will know that politicians are regularly asked, hey, is there any kind of a bias that you have in making your decisions? And of course, politicians have really clear answers, and they say, no, and whatever their responses are. For us in this investment profession, we need to make sure that we do not have biases and that we are not going to put somebody else's interests in front of another person's interests. So look at the judgments there: investment analysis, investment recommendations, taking investment actions, and engaging in other professional activities. Now, this doesn't mean that if you have a personal or a professional relationship with an individual or an organization, it doesn't mean that you can't provide that particular entity with financial advice. Of course, you need to talk about this with your colleagues, with your boss, with the compliance. And, in the end, it might just be something like you just tell everybody, oh, hey, yeah, this person over here, that's my grandmother. And, we get along great. And I'm not going to put her interests before any of the other interests. And so disclosure is extremely important there. Professional and ethical manner that will reflect credit on themselves and the profession. Boy, I'm guessing you're thinking the same thing that I'm thinking. In this day and age of social media, boy, you post some things, you need to make sure that you post it that reflects well on yourselves, that reflects well on your families, reflects well on your colleagues, and of course the profession. And then this is the part I like that we want to encourage. So we're practicing. It's one thing for us to do this, but we're encouraging others to practice in a professional and ethical manner. What you'll learn as you watch my videos, I love to give sports analogies. I'm a big sports fan, and I love watching golf on television, and I'm always fascinated whenever there's a conflict out on the course. Is there a particular rule of golf that a particular golfer violated. The golfer will call it on him or herself and bring over the playing competitors and bring over the rules official, and the TV camera gets right in there, and then the cameras are saying, oh boy, it moved. Boy, the ball moved. Oh, I think it moved an angstrom. And then everyone agrees, so ethical manner, reflect credit on themselves so that when everyone walks away from whatever decision is made, everybody feels good about themselves. Now, the individual who gets a 1 or 2 stroke penalty might be knocking themselves in the head saying, why did I do that? But everybody feels good about themselves. So that's really the idea behind this bullet point. Promote the integrity and viability of the global capital markets. All right, so it used to be this learning objective was promote integrity of the global capital markets. They added the viability of this. So let's kind of see what this means in terms of adding these extra words. So integrity, we know what that means. We know what global capital markets means. What's the goal of a global capital market? Well, first of all, it's to allocate resources, right? And how about, let's say, an efficient allocation of resources? But that must include, what must be a huge part of this is the efficient dissemination of information. So we have to be allocative efficient and informationally efficient inside of that global capital market. So whatever promote the viability of global capital markets means, it has to include those two groups of efficiency. And the CFA Institute added the ultimate benefit of society. And right inside of that first reading, it tells us that one of the goals is to improve efficiency. So I just said that. Another goal is to improve living standards. And then another goal is to improve the long-term health of these global markets. So think of that integrity, which we know, and think of viability for the benefit of society as kind of extras for this year's exam. Maintain and improve professional competence. Of course, right? What are we doing now? We're trying to increase our professional competence by preparing for the Level II exam. And then once we know all of this material and we pass the exam, we're not going to flush it out of our brains. Not only are we going to retain it, but we're going to, strive to maintain and improve the competence of other investment professionals. And this is what I did in my life. 30 some years ago, I said yes, and I said I do, and I married a woman who has springboarded me to lots and lots of success in our life. I try to convince my children, surround yourself with people who are better than you are. And whatever better means, could be they're smarter, could be they're funnier, could be they're more entertaining, but whatever they are, they'll lift you. And so that's what we're trying to do here. So look at the tip at the bottom. You do not need to know verbatim, but the general principles. That makes sense, right? All right, so how about the second part of this LOS? Describe the 7 standards. I'm going to go through these just fairly quickly here, because if you look at the bottom purple box, we will look at each of these standards in way more detail in reading 2. Like if reading one is this big, then reading 2 is, can you guys see my arms way out there? It's that big. Professionalism, of course, we want to act as a professional. We've talked about integrity, and let's talk about duties. All right, so we have a duty to ourself in terms of that professionalism. What did I say a couple of slides ago? Competence and reasonable care, all those kinds of things. So a duty to ourselves to be professionals, but then, of course, we're not an island. We're not operating inside of our own little bubble. We have duties to clients, and we have duties to prospective clients, and we have duties to employers. So let's skip down. That brings in this specter of conflicts of interest. So we'll spend a lot of time talking about disclosures and managing conflicts and the appearance of conflicts. But then let me swing back and get that number 5 there. So investment, analysis, recommendations, and actions. And then finally, responsibilities as a member or a candidate. How about the second LOS? Explain ethical responsibilities. All right, so all CFA candidates and members are required to comply with the code. That makes sense. We're required to self-disclose on an annual professional conduct statement all incidences that will affect their professional conduct. There are some examples there. The CFA Institute Board of Governors is responsible for the PCP program, and there's a disciplinary committee, and they enforce this. I encourage you to go to the CFA webpage. You can read about all of the actions and inactions and concluding statements and results. Inquiries may come from self-disclosure. Let me go back to the golfing example, right? Golfers tend to say, oh, I grounded my club and I think the ball moved. I'm not sure if the ball moved. They bring in the rules official, the camera gets there. All right, so self-disclosure. All right, written complaints, media or regulatory authorities. You go back several years, boy, I can't remember what year it was, but Tiger Woods had he dropped the ball in the middle of the 15th fairway. I guess they were doing lift, clean, in place. And he dropped it, I don't know, maybe 6 inches away from, the one club length guideline. And the TV cameras picked it up and people wrote in and said, oh my gosh, he did it outside. And of course, Tiger didn't know anything about it. He wasn't trying to bend the rules. He's just focused and he thought he was inside of that club length. And I guess he made a mistake. And I'm pretty sure he got a 1-stroke penalty for that. Anyway, so there's media or regulatory authorities, and then exam proctors who report misconduct on the exam day. My advice to you on exam day is to wear your blinders. Just look ahead, write down at your paper, and don't look around and listen to the proctor, every word that he or she says. The PCP is responsible for investigating and giving final conclusions, and there can be a couple of different types of censures, public or suspension. But notice what we have down the bottom there. Promote the highest ethical responsibilities and values, integrity of capital markets, and the wider investment profession. And that takes us through that first reading. And next up is the guidance for standards of professional conduct. So let me just swing back here just really quickly. And so I imagine I'll make a handful of videos on these here. So we'll come back and we'll dive deep into the deep end. And remember what we're trying to do here in level 2. Let me go back to the end. So I'm at the end. What we're trying to do in level 2 is to add a layer of subtlety to our knowledge base and our ability to apply these standards to ethical issues.